And we're going to tell the story of Liz Truss's rise and fall through 5 disgraces, because that's certainly what because of this, basically.
That is a disgrace.
So they all have to qualify for that. She quickly entered the pub quiz history books as the UK's shortest-serving Prime Minister at just 45 days in office. But what a 45 days they were. They came at the end of a political career which saw her go from teenage Lib Dem to cabinet survivor. Lots of international travel, lots of social media posts, and it turns out quite a lot of Sauvignon Blanc along the way. We know a lot of that thanks to the authors of Out of the Blue, the inside story of the unexpected rise and rapid fall of Liz Truss. They are the Sun's Harry Cole and the Spectator's James Heale, and they both join me now. Morning, gents.
Good morning.
So first of all, this was originally meant to be the account of her rise as she began a long period in office. At what point did it become clear that this was going to be a rather more complete account of her premiership, Harry?
I reckon about Saturday morning after the mini budget. So what was that, the 19th, 20th of
About
September?
that point, yeah, the week before party conference.
The week before party conference, when the pound started tanking. And usually, I think, there's a great quote in the Sunday Times that week, which was, "Only the mad people like this," which I think suddenly thought, hang on, we might be in trouble.
The wrong people are clapping.
So, James, when did you start writing it, and when did you stop writing it?
We started 20th of August, I believe. So when it was clear at that point she was going to win, like fortnight left of the race when it was basically all over.
Yeah.
And we would then plan to stop it on the conference speech, her address to the nation, first chance to really make an impression with voters. I think at that point we realised the radical mission of Liz Truss was over at that point. It was clearly, but she might hang on, she might do it to Theresa May, she might hang on for a number of more months. But, clearly after that, developments overtook us and we ended it just as she left on that Monday last week.
So what we thought we'd do is do the best bits of the book, basically.
Very good.
The juiciest tidbits, the most salacious gossip.
You'd have to buy it.
And we're going to tell the story of Liz Truss's rise and fall through 5 disgraces, because that's certainly what because of this, basically.
That is a disgrace.
So they all have to qualify for that. So this is the first Liz Truss disgrace. We go all the way back. This is from Sky News back in 2009.
After a summer of scandal over MPs' expenses, another row has broken out in the Conservative Party, this time over standards of sexual behaviour. Norfolk's South West Constituency Party is threatening to deselect their candidate Elizabeth Truss because she didn't tell them she had an affair with a married man 5 years ago. David Cameron says she's an excellent candidate, saying her affair with the MP Mark Field had been in the public domain when she was selected.
God, that takes me back. So this is Liz Truss nearly facing deselection after it was revealed she'd had an affair with the Tory MP Mark Field back in 2005, James.
Yes, and what was quite remarkable was that this is, 2009, but reading it is something from, the 90s or something like that, back to basics era. Basically, Liz Truss had this affair, very well publicised in 2006, and then she went for the selection 3 years later. Now, she said that it was all out there on the internet, quite fairly. Unfortunately, no one at the selection meeting thought to Google her. This was, I think, one of the first things to come up Mail Online. And it was some of the quotes just gold from this. And there was...
It does read from like a different age.
Sir Jeremy Bagg just saying, no one in Norfolk has Googled, Ironically, she was selected on a pledge to improve rural broadband, which
might have helped them.
It sort of made her name, though, in a way, because she became
the Turnip Taliban.
The Turnip Taliban, which if you have to read the book to discover who actually made that up.
Okay.
Because yes, that was one of the more controversial sort of things. It pitched the Turnip Taliban against the Notting Hill set, the Tory modernisers, the Cameroons, and she became almost a sort of canary in the coal mine of Cameron and Osborne were determined that part of their modernisation project was that they were not going to let this association, basically on the grounds of what they saw as sexist, there was no cause to deselect Mark Field, derail their plan for the A-list. And so when she kind of arrived in Westminster, she was already this celebrity.
There was definitely a
famous for
she
Westminster.
was one of those sort of, whenever there's an election and a sort of an influx, there's always sort of buzz around some of them. Actually, in a way, there was a bit with Rishi Sunak later when he replaced William Hague.
Absolutely.
Not just because he was, replacing a high-profile person, but sort of MPs come in already with a bit of buzz around.
It was quite a big intake as well, because obviously MPs' expenses meant there was a huge clear out of sort of crooks and dead wood from both sides of the house into the 2010 election. So actually there was a sort of very, very competitive young intake. And if you think about who they are, they're Sajid Javid, Matt Hancock, Nikki Morgan, Nadeem Zahawi, Amber Rudd. And she basically outlasted all of them.
Yeah.
She was the only one that got all the way
to the top of that generation.
Yeah.
And because given that what we now know about her politics, in what she set out, it's so far actually from Cameron and Osborne's politics. Why did they align herself with it? And she was constantly being tipped. I remember in particular by the Daily Mail for every time a reshuffle came around, she was definitely on the list for promotion.
I think she started out as a moderniser. She definitely was. She was involved in Paul Tillow's campaign, we discovered, a disastrous leadership campaign. I think the Tory party kind of came to her. And very much Cameron was the moderniser that. But then she very quickly became an Osborneite. She's been very, very good at shape-shifting and actually aligning herself miraculously to whoever's on the ascendancy. You can see why she didn't stick around the Lib Dems, because obviously they were going nowhere at that time. Then she was a Cameroon, then she was an Osborneite, and then she was a Remainer when that looked like they were going to win. And then she became the Brexiteer, and then she became a Borisista, we call them that, barista. And then she was sort of standing there, the last one standing, and suddenly it was Trussonomics, and we saw how that
I suppose
went.
it's a sign, James, of how the Tory party has changed. Did the membership voted for her? Actually, in a way that maybe if it had happened back in 2009, they might not have done that. Actually, having had an affair might have been a bigger issue.
Yeah, completely. And I think also she's very much a modern metropolitan woman, as we sort of detail in the book. You know, she loves her espresso. She's very modern thinking. She welcomes change in a way. She's very unconservative in some ways. And perhaps it was that radical streak and that desire to be seen as radical, which perhaps led to some of her undoing. But yeah, not a traditional Tory in lots of ways. But I think she was ambitious. She wanted to get on. And I think in a sort of post-Thatcher, post-Cameron way, she represented a lot of the modern Tory party.
Someone's just texted and said, I totally missed the Liz Truss affair. How could she? Hugh was out of her league to begin with. Now I don't feel so bad that she was ousted. Hugh obviously being her husband. Who stood by her.
Interesting guy. Obviously, he kept very much the Dennis Thatcher mould of president but not involved. I don't think that was the exact Dennis Thatcher quote. But clearly...
I think that's actually a joke. We don't know. We never got to the stage of Hugh having too much influence on policy.
No, well, we never quite got to that row. We don't know what he thought about wallpaper, but he is, we have ascertained, pretty right-wing.
Yeah, we found some of his university days, and there was a great one, like snippet from the book, is the fact that his old sparring partner at university was Martin Lewis, the money-saving expert.
Who was the head of the Socialist Club when she was the head of the Tory
LSE.
Club, and they were battled against each other for places
Maybe
on
we should get them both on.
NUS delegation
Reunion.
I think that was been one of the papers on Saturday. Never mind, that's gone.
What I also love is that, Hugh Lewis was just at the bar at Tory conference, just standing there picking up gossip, but completely, and went completely under the radar. And I think he's someone who's always been there as a support for her. And I think that's quite important as a very supportive political spouse in her rise to power.
And stood by her. So that was number one then. That's number one disgrace, Liz Truss's affair.
That is a disgrace.
So we go on to number two now. In her first ministerial job in 2012, Liz Truss fired up the Department for Education, so the junior minister under Michael Gove, with a major plan to deregulate childcare. But it didn't go very well. Here's a clip from an ITV News report from the time.
Nick Clegg hasn't just nibbled the ankles of his Conservative colleagues, he's completely obliterated them and their plans to allow nurseries and childminders to increase the numbers of children they look after.
This unilateral move by Nick Clegg is both unusual and unorthodox. He has, in effect, blocked plans by the Conservative Children's Minister, Liz Truss.
So, Harry, explain what it was that Liz Truss wanted to do with childcare and why, because we touched on this briefly the other day when you were on. You think that the signs of why she might not have worked out brilliantly as Prime Minister, all of the pattern was established quite early on and the way she operated.
Yeah, I mean, she almost sort of got indoctrinated and sort of radicalised by the sort of Gove outfit that were there at the time. There's a great line. They're self-proclaimed flyers of the Jolly Roger. They were the pirates of Whitehall. And if you remember back to that time of education reforms, Cummings was in his pomp when Gove was, the sort of, really, they were pushing seriously radical stuff, and they thought the way they'd got to do it is go in like a bulldozer, quickly, with very little care or consider for the so-called blob of bringing. You could either bring people with you or you could get stuff done. And I think Truss saw how that was done. And thought, I'll have a bit of that. So came in 2012, and didn't really, and stop me if you heard this one before again, do much pitch rolling. Bring people in, do consultations, feedback. It was all very, very rushed. There was a speech, a consultation. The consultation came back and said, this is a terrible idea. The childcare sector doesn't want it. She wanted to increase the number of kids that childminders could look after. And still, to this day, remains a heavily regulated industry in a way that it's not in places like France. So she sort of came in threw the desk up in the air and said, "Let's do this, it's great." And everyone went, "Ugh." And then the sort of Mumsnet lobby, the Lib Dems, Labour, everyone just sort of slowly sort of cranked up. And eventually went, "You know what, this is too much hard work, I will ditch it." And so, yeah, I do think there's the signs, when I keep saying this, the signs were there. That was a very clear one. And it's actually quite funny. You get into the sort of human hand grenade angle of sort of Cummings and Gove. And it's where her very strange relationship with Gove began, in that he was almost quite Petrarchan to her to begin with, quite donnish. He would push her, promote her, stress test her, but he was always slightly just overshadowing her, and that's played out throughout her career as well.
There was this weird thing, James, as well done with Michael Gove, where they sort of ended up in the same departments.
Yeah.
You know, she was Justice Secretary, he was Justice Secretary, she was Environment Secretary, famously talking about cheese. He was then later there. And then, of course, didn't give him a job.
Yes, there's a sort of decade-long dance across all the Whitehall ministries, and we see that, I think, probably best articulated in when she was Trade Secretary. And, he was obviously standing on one side of the Brexit debate about, standards, and standing up for what he thought was like, British standards have a premium, etc. And she was arguing for the free trade angle. So it was dubbed in the press as the Lidl versus Waitrose, Lidl free marketeers versus the Waitrose protectionists, and all this kind of stuff. And I think that basically they are two of the most successful politicians of their generation. Each of them sort of slightly wary but respected each other. And
they both have a tendency for mischief making as well.
Yes,
which put together, they quite like it when one of the others on the up and the other one's on the down. And actually,
it's that whole thing. There's only room for one attention seeker.
If they ever worked together, they could have been unstoppable.
Well, that was number 2 then. Liz Truss's childcare reforms.
That is a disgrace.
We've got to number 3 now. The third disgrace. In 2016, Liz Truss backed Remain in the EU referendum. Here she is speaking in the run-up to the vote.
So I think we've got to be very careful about taking that single market for granted and being outside that single market. And the single market isn't something that is a sexy, exciting thing to explain, but it is really crucial.
So that was Liz Truss making the case for Remain, James. Which did she actually believe? Was she really a Remainer who then pretended to be a Leaver, or a Leaver who pretended to be Remain?
If I can slightly sidestep the question, I just don't think Europe was that important to her ideology ever. There was a cabinet meeting in which she said, there was a crunch cabinet meeting in February 2016, and she goes around and she says, look, we've got so many important things to do in Britain. We want to change tax and regulation, etc. Europe is not the cause or solution to our problems. She said to one friend, I think at the time, that it wasn't in the top 20 problems facing the country. So really quite apathetic. It's never really featured in her writings as a backbencher as it did. Other maybe people of her generation were very motivated by it. And so I think she was a pragmatic Remainer, went along with it.
Yeah, I think she thought Remain's going to win. Why would I pee off, so to speak, the Prime Minister and risk my job when, Remain's going to win anyway? And I think she said I think Michael Gove's on the record in the book saying that, I hope he is anyway. He's on the record in the book saying that during a meeting, he said, Liz Truss said to him, "Michael, there's nothing that I would ever want to do or achieve that we couldn't do within the EU." That's my Liz Truss impression.
It's very good.
Thank you.
Yeah, but it's of no great use anymore.
No.
You're not going to get a lot of work from doing that. It's interesting that. So I suppose then us having left the EU, it was that she embraced it, saying that maybe there were now some things that she could do.
Again, this is
but it was about the thing that she wanted to do. It wasn't about Brexit.
I think she was quite pleasantly surprised by the fact that the country did vote leave.
Yeah.
And I think she thought, oh, hang on, maybe there is a bigger constituency for my slightly sort of more radical views on the sort of Singapore-on-Thames side of things, the deregulation stuff. And she saw it as an advantage and thought, right, the country's made up their mind, let's show them what it could be like.
So there we are, that's disgrace number 3. Liz Truss going from Remainer to Leaver.
That is a disgrace.
Although actually, in reality, we've agreed that she's probably neither. Right, let's move on to number 4 then. This is one of my favourite Liz Truss disgraces, her use of social media. Here is a clip from a video she posted on her Instagram in May 2019, ahead of the spending review, when she was Chief Secretary to the Treasury.
So I first moved from Leeds when I got a job working in the oil industry, and I was able to rent a place and then buy a place. And what I worry about now is it is harder for people to do that in London.
Well, it sounds like a leadership camp.
It sounds like we should have put that in the book, James. That's the first time I've ever heard that.
James, one of the things I really enjoyed in the serialisation of the Sunday Times was the detailing of her. It was particularly when she was International Trade Secretary. Yeah. Going around the world, supposedly dealing with, drumming up trade deals. But she spent almost her entire time, it seems, trying to get the best photo for Instagram.
Yes,
and that's really not an exaggeration.
There were some extraordinary lengths to go to. I think there was also one fantastic line that we report, which is that at one point, Liz Truss, when she was Foreign Secretary, was having a photo of her uploaded every 5 hours on the government Flickr account.
Yeah, of course.
So it wasn't just Instagram. She was multi-platform.
Yeah.
And I think, she saw it as an extraordinary part of her job to be out banging the drum for British business, British industry. And in some ways, you can actually tell the story of Liz Truss in microcosm through her Instagram feed, where it starts off with these kind of slightly weird sort of ingenue photos of her in 2017. And then she thinks when she gets Chief Sec, forget this, I'm not going to stick with the party line anymore. And she starts doing more power dressing, and then it sort of summarises in the Foreign Secretary when she's in a tank and all this kind of stuff.
There is a case for the defence on it as well, trade, which is that at the time, these negotiations, the incredibly dry, boring trade negotiations were going behind the scenes with Australia and Japan. And they were at a really technical level. So actually, what does the Trade Secretary do, public facing? Because she can't lift the lid on what she's doing, which is negotiating stuff. And it was actually quite simple. Big Union Jack umbrella, Sydney, bang, we're doing an Australia deal. Big mini parked up in New York, bang, we're going to try and do a US trade deal. Go to the famous roundabout or crossing in Japan. Here's Liz Truss in Japan. And actually, everyone took the mick, and you can see why, but that branding did kind of work. It did really raise her profile.
I remember the context as well. Obviously, Brexit wasn't going so well for a part of this, but then also the pandemic hit. And so everyone was at home and doing stuff. And she was out there because she had an exemption rightly for her travel, all this kind of stuff. And it really helped her.
It got her into the job. It got her into the Foreign Secretary job. And once she was the Foreign Secretary, she was, she seemed unstoppable.
And I suppose if the talks aren't going very well, if the pictures are good,
you can cover up a multitude of sins. Yeah.
But there are moments where it went maybe a bit far. When she went to New Zealand, Harry, who wants to tell the New Zealand story?
It's just one of those great ones where people are just genuinely, it's very, very Liz Truss, and it just sort of slightly encapsulates her sort of focused and driven desire to get things right. But what she was trying to get right was a long tweet thread where every single bullet point of the tweet thread was actually a tiny kiwi emoji, while a very senior member of the diplomatic corps was attempting to brief her on the multi-million-pound trade investment she's trying to do.
So they sat awkwardly in the car.
And they sat awkwardly in the back of the car while the poor official was trying to
even before they got into the car, there was a long
delay
delay because she was trying to find someone with some good light.
Good light. Good, but also, I think because she landed essentially in Wellington Airport, I think it was, and it's quite a bleak place. You could be anywhere in the world. So I think she was trying to prove to the point she was actually in New Zealand. Yeah, and they ended up doing it in front of a Land Rover.
Somebody's just texting in saying, who was actually looking at Liz Truss's social media? Surely it was just her family, other politicians and journalists. No one else could be remotely interested.
Well, I don't know. It became a bit of a cult following. Our picture desk loved it because she was like Taylor Swift was on there,
and she had all
Toff from Made in Chelsea. Yeah. There was always like
170,000, and also crucially, those photos often then ended up in the papers.
Exactly. There was always a surprise mystery guest of you come into work the next morning and work out where Liz Truss has been the night before, and it'd be with Taylor Swift, and you'd just be like, of course, why not?
So there we are. Then that was number. Which one was that? Number 4. Liz Truss's use of social media.
That is a disgrace.
So we move on to the disgrace number 5. It's basically the one that did for her. This was Liz Truss speaking in Downing Street after her election.
I will get Britain working again. I have a bold plan to grow the economy through tax cuts and reform. I will cut taxes to reward hard work and boost business-led growth and investment.
A bold plan to grow the economy through tax cuts. How did that go, James?
I was going to go with like maybe 3 out of 10.
Yeah, not well.
It was a bold plan.
It was bold, very bold. And she said,
we'll give her a point for that.
She said she didn't mind being disliked or being unpopular. She got that. She kept her pledge, and she promised to hit the ground from day one. And
she did pledge to hit the ground from day one.
I think, look, it just shows the difficulty of coming in 2 years before the end of the Parliament with a radical prospectus and not carrying everyone with you, really.
And not taking into account you're also spending £60 billion, or at least minimum, on an energy price cap that, while there was political consensus for, that she just thought she'd get away with the price tag of it as well. So doing that on top of doing the tax cuts on top of all of that, plus then the death of the monarch, I think she should have just slowed it all down. And I imagine she'll regret that, not slowing it down for the
But
rest
that's
of her
who
life.
she is. And as we said,
Yeah.
the clues are all through the book, where she is someone who wants to be seen as radical, very impatient, very keen to get things done, for better or worse. Can annoy some people. It's very
Yeah.
Marmite.
Tearing around Downing Street saying, I've only got 2 years, I've only got 2 years. And it turned out she only had 2 months.
2 months.
If that.
Have you spoke? 'Cause I know you spoke to her in the early stages of the book when she was going to ride high. Have you spoken to her since she left?
No comment. I have a lot of time for Liz Truss. I do think she's, I imagine she's not in a. I imagine the true reality of what has happened is only beginning to dawn on her. So I don't really have a bad word to say about her.
Nothing personally, really.
On that front.
Just funny. Do you think? I mean, a lot of people talk about politics. Do you think she could come back? But it's not
She's
as
young.
leader
She's
than
really
as a
young.
cabinet minister.
She's the youngest ever former. Well, what was the stat? She's one of the youngest ever ex-prime ministers.
Yeah.
Who lived. So look, she's going to do something. That inexhaustible energy is going to go somewhere. I imagine there's a big career on the right wing think circuit of Washington.
IDS and Hague came back on the front bench under different successive leaders. There's a scenario perhaps where the Tories lose a lot of seats in the next election. She stays on South West Norfolk, safe seat. They need someone who's going to be a bit punchy. She's reasonably good in the House of Commons. You can see a kind of scenario. It's very unlikely, but you can see a kind
I think she's also got quite a lot of work to do to make sure that she doesn't become synonymous with failure of tax and basically rebranding tax cuts generally. Joe Biden's really interested in the way that he's basically using her as a campaign tool now during the midterms as a bogeyman story of what happens if you cut taxes. And that's, I imagine, a legacy that will particularly hurt.
So there we are. That was Liz Truss's fifth disgrace, her resignation.
That is a disgrace.
Gents, I enjoyed that a lot.
No, thank you for having us.
Single best tidbit in the book that people should keep an eye out for?
The fact it is available now as an ebook. There's I can't choose. There's some very funny. She's very open and candid with people around her. And she almost sort of gives a very amusing running commentary of things that politicians don't normally give running commentary.
I think the humour, the self-aware humour.
The self-aware humour is pretty funny, and the swearing actually. Some good swearing.
Some good swearing, which luckily you've avoided doing on the radio. Out of the Blue: The Inside Story, the Unexpected Rise and Rapid Fall of Liz Truss is published by HarperCollins. The ebook, as how we were saying, is out today, and it's out in shops on November the 24th. If you want to buy
out
a
in time
hard
for
copy.
Christmas.
Out in time for Christmas.
As Keir Starmer said.
As Keir Starmer said.